All right. So that's what's going on. So the quiz Wednesday, I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'll probably have you guys come in like 2 groups. Wait, I need to, someone's got to mute. Check to make sure you're all muted. Ariel, maybe I can mute you. I got you. All right. Okay, so that's what we're doing. I'll send out a schedule tonight. It's probably just a matter of having one group come in at like 9 and another group come in like at, let's say like 9:20, and then that's it. And so everybody, and then I'll start lecturing around 9:40. And you know, Wednesday is not going to be heavy material. Today is a little bit heavy. It might be a little bit heavy. Wednesday, the stuff on plants, that is not heavy material. That is, you know, that's really high school material, or yeah, it's like that. So it shouldn't be too hard. And typically people do well on exam 3, and they do very well on quiz 4. Exam 4 might take a little bit of work, but I've scheduled the last week where we don't actually have lectures. If you notice, like on the syllabus, it says review. So I scheduled extra time in there. So I'm going to jump into photosynthesis. The name is actually telling you what it is. Photo meaning light, and synthesis meaning to make something, right? So they always use the word synthesize or synthesis. They always use that word in biology. I'm going to write a little bit larger. So the photo meaning light. Forgot how to spell synthesis. I need a second here. I just wrote it, I know it. And synthesis means to make. So we're really talking about how plants get their energy. I'm not going to say plants here. I'm going to use another word, autotroph. It's really, how do you get electrons to make ATP? So if you remember from the last chapter on cellular respiration, we got electrons from the Krebs cycle. That was the question on that. You know, like, what's the whole point of the Krebs cycle? It was to get electrons. And then we take those electrons and we turned on these pumps. They created this proton gradient, and then that made the ATP. Right? That's what we do. That's what plants also do. The question is, where do we get our electrons? With us, we have to get it from our food. That's what the Krebs cycle was about. So it's about breaking down that acetyl-CoA molecule and getting energy from it, getting electrons from it. Right? So we get electrons from food. Plants can get it they can get it using sunlight. They take the energy that's in sunlight and they're going to pull electrons out of water. So they can create their own source of electrons using sunlight. They're like solar panels. We are called heterotroph. Hetero means like something else. Auto meaning self. So they get their energy from themselves. We are heterotrophs. We get it from eating something. So what plants are doing is they want to get this energy, but they want to take this energy and they want to make sugar. So I'm going to go back to the formula again, and for sugar we're using CH2O. That's what you want to get. That's representing sugar, right? Or another way to write that is C6H12O6. That's the way you'll see it. Another way you'll see it written, right? Or we could just write it like that. So what's going into the process? What does the plant need in order to start making sugar? It needs two things: carbon dioxide and water. If you give it carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is in the air, so it's easy. It gets carbon dioxide from the air, it gets water from the soil, it makes sugar. And if you match this up, you can see what's going on. So you can match the C's up. There's the C, that matches up. H2O, H2O. That matches up. What are we left with? Yeah, so the byproduct for plants is oxygen gas. So just like we do not need carbon dioxide, we're trying to get rid of it. Plants do need carbon dioxide, and they're getting rid of oxygen. This is just backwards from respiration. In respiration, we took oxygen and we took sugar and we broke it down to make energy. And what did we release? We released carbon dioxide and we released water. So it's just this, respiration goes this way, photosynthesis goes that way. So it's just kind of a reverse, right? And I asked a question on the quiz, which I didn't mark anybody wrong for this, but I asked what's the purpose of cellular respiration? That you need to know. It was to break our food down to make ATP. And then I asked, is it anabolic, catabolic? And then a couple students made me realize that's not a fair question because there's things being made. You know, ATP is being made in respiration. So that's anabolic. The food's being broken down, that's catabolic, right? So, but really what I was looking for is it's essentially a catabolic process. It's all about breaking things down. Glycolysis, you're breaking stuff down. You're breaking down your sugar. Krebs cycle, you're breaking up that molecule. Right? So your food is essentially gone. Right? So I was looking for catabolic, but I just ignored that part of the question. So this is an anabolic process. This is about building something. At the end of it all, you really want to build sugar. That's what the plant is trying to do. The plant's trying to build sugar. Here's the two ingredients. So we want to take these, put them together, mix them together to make this. Of course, they're going to have a little oxygen left over, and you could just get rid of that, throw that out into the air. Right? So the plant wants to mix carbon dioxide and water together, make sugar. So the leaves of plants are making, they're making glucose, and then they're going to save it as starch. So if you think about like a potato plant, the leaves of the potato are making glucose, and then they're storing that glucose as starch in the potato part of the potato. All right, let me see if I can get this thing to work. Give me a second here. Can you guys see a PowerPoint? Oh, can you see a PowerPoint presentation showing up on yours?
No. Oh, let me unpin your screen.
Yes, I see it.
All right, yeah, if you guys unpin me, you should be able to see a PowerPoint presentation. And so I'm going to kind of go off of that for a little while. So I'm not going to be on the board. I'm just going to talk off of this. So we're going to talk about how the plant does this. All right, and so the first thing we should look at is the fact that there's energy inside sunlight. And so we call those photons. And I'll spell it out for you, P-H-O-T-O-N-S. Like in Star Trek. So photons, that's the energy that's in sunlight. Most objects cannot do anything with that energy. When the sun hits your car, for example, like the paint on your car, it just gets it hot. And so that's just the energy transferred. The sunbeams or the photons are hitting your car, and then they bounce off in the form of heat. That's why things get hot. That's why things like your car get hot. Plants are different. They're able to trap that photon energy. Again, they're like solar panels, right? So they're able to trap that energy. So we call that energy photons. Well, let's take a look at the leaf a little bit closer up. So here we have the leaf, and within the leaf, you have specialized cells that are called mesophyll cells. So that's right here. And those are just cells where you have a lot of chloroplasts. So if you were to look at, for example, if we go back to the potato, and you look at the potato itself, the part that we eat, those aren't mesophyll cells, right? There's no chloroplast inside that. And we know that because they're not green, right? So potatoes don't have chloroplast. Potatoes aren't exposed, the part that we eat, they're not exposed to the sun, they're under the ground. They're not mesophyll cells, right? So there's cells in the leaf, they have lots of chloroplasts. So if you remember, chloroplast is one of the organelles of a cell. So this second picture here, here's the cell right here. It's like roundish. And inside you see a bunch of round circles. So this plant cell is filled with chloroplasts. So that's what a mesophyll cell is. A mesophyll cell has tons of chloroplasts inside of it. If we were to take a leaf from outside and kind of scrape it down a little bit with like sometimes I'll take it and I'll scrape it with a razor to make it thin, like really thin. And then if you put it under a microscope, it'll look like this. You can see the chloroplasts in there. So the chloroplast, this is the solar panel part. This is the part that's going to trap the sunlight, the photons. So when you look at the chloroplast, there's a few things going on here, but really we're talking about two parts, right? One part is these green things. So you can see like these green discs. Those are called thylakoid, right here. That is the solar panel part. The thylakoid is the part of the chloroplast that is going to trap the sunlight. So you have the thylakoid, that's going to trap the sun, and then they're floating. These discs, by the way, when they're stacked up, it's called grana. I don't care about that, but that's why the word's here. So when you stack these discs, each disc is called the thylakoid. When you stack it, it's called a grana. But you have the thylakoid, and then you have this fluid, which is kind of a yellowish here. It's floating inside of a fluid, and we call that fluid stroma. So the two words that you need to know from the chloroplast, thylakoid, and then the liquid called stroma. Now there's another word that kind of looks like stroma, so I just want to show you now. You see here, this leaf, there's like a leaf pore. When you look at leaves under a microscope, you can see like little holes. And we call those holes, if it's like one hole, we call it a stoma, without the R. S-T-O-M-A. By the way, that's in medicine too, right? A hole in somebody's neck, we call it a stoma. If somebody had like a lot of tubes sticking out of their neck, we call it stoma. Right, so anyway, with plants, it's the same thing. It's like a hole that's for breathing, except that plants breathe the opposite that we do, right? They take in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen. But a single one of them is called a stoma. But stroma is just coincidence here. Stroma with an R, that's the liquid that everything's going to be floating in. Can you guys see the whiteboard again?
Yes.
Okay. So when we're talking about this, there's two separate things that are going to be going on, right? So the goal of the plant is to make sugar. That's the goal. But it happens in two steps. Because whenever you make something, like making sugar, that's anabolic, right? You're making something. When you make something, that means you need energy. So remember, anabolic reactions build things and use energy. So we need energy. So the first part of this equation is we have to get the energy. Then the second part of it is that we use the energy to make sugar. I'm going to say glucose. Glucose, sugar, right? So it's two steps, right? So now let's be a little bit more specific. What do we mean by get energy? We're gonna take sunlight and convert it. Actually, I shouldn't say sunlight. I should use the more accurate word, photons. We're going to take photons from the sun and we're going to convert that into a type of energy that we can use, which is ATP. And we're going to keep some electrons too. So ATP is the main type of energy, right? But for us, it's pretty much just ATP. That's our energy. We're like gasoline cars. Plants are kind of like hybrids. They're like a Prius, right? They've got both. They've got ATP, but they've also got electrons. So there's like the battery and there's the gas, right? So plants will they want to make ATP just like we make ATP. They keep some electrons aside because they like to use both. They're both sources of energy. So we got to take the sunlight coming down and just convert that into ATP and electrons. This is not usable for the plant. The plant cannot use this directly to make sugar. It's potential energy. This it can use. This can be used to make sugar. Same thing, our food cannot be used to make ATP. Like our food, like you can't take a hamburger and move your muscles with it, right? You got to take the hamburger and eat it, break it up, and convert it into ATP. Same thing with a plant. Just like we cannot use food to do things, the plant cannot use just sunlight to do things. You got to make ATP. So now that we have the ATP and the electrons, we can use that to put carbon dioxide and water together. I'm going to walk away from the board so it shows up. Go back. So there's two parts. One part is taking the sunlight and converting it over to ATP and electrons. That is get the energy. Right? Now that we have the ATP and electrons, we're going to use it to put carbon dioxide and water together, and we can make sugar or glucose. So we got two different reactions going on. One of them, we need light. We need the sunlight to do it. The other reaction, we don't need that. It doesn't depend on sunlight. So obviously the first part, getting the energy, turning the photons into ATP, obviously we need the sun for that. That's not going to happen in the middle of the night when there's no sun. Solar panels don't work at night. So that first part, we're going to call them light reactions because they need the light. It's that simple. So they're light reactions. Sometimes some books will call it light-dependent reactions, meaning that they need the light. I call them light and dark. Another way you could say is light-dependent and light-independent. I just go with the lazier way, light reactions, dark reactions, right? So the first part where you get energy, those are light reactions. The second part where you take the ATP and electrons and you use it to make glucose, that's a dark reaction, or light independent, right? You could do that anytime during the day. The plant can do that in the middle of the night. You don't need sunlight, you already have ATP and electrons, you already have your energy. So you could just go ahead and make sugar all night. So we have two types of reactions here. In fact, I'm going to write that up on the board. So I'll just... So we have light reactions and we have dark reactions. Again, light dependent, light independent. That's the two types of reactions. Now let's go back to the chloroplast. There's two parts in the chloroplast. There's the green disc, the thylakoid, and then there's that fluid that is floating in the stroma. So this happens in the thylakoid. Then the dark reactions happen in the stroma. I know that might be small. It'll go back. I know the moving board is annoying. You don't have to tell me. It's annoying. So, you've got light reactions, you have dark reactions. Light reactions happen in the thylakoid, dark reactions happen in the stroma. You've already got a couple of test questions here, and I haven't really gotten into it yet. But I'd like you to know where light reactions happen and where dark reactions happen. I'd like you to know the point of photosynthesis. And it's not a complicated, some of you that have your phones with you, you keep typing shit in, it doesn't have to be that complicated. In the time that it takes you to put my question into Quizlet or Chegg, or wherever you're putting it, you could just type out, what's the point of photosynthesis? The plant makes sugar. Done.
Would we be able to put them together with light?
You can say that. I mean, there's room to be much more to say as much as you want, but for those of you that are minimalist, I mean, what is photosynthesis about? I'm like into that. I just want you to know just what's the point? It's to make sugar. That's what the plant's trying to do. It's trying to make sugar. It's going to take sunlight, the energy in sunlight, and it's going to make sugar out of it. What is sugar? Sugar is energy. It's just energy storage. That's all it is. What are photons? Energy. You're just transferring one form of energy into another form of energy. You're taking sunlight, you're turning that into ATP. What is ATP? It's energy. And you're converting that ATP into sugar. What is sugar? Energy. That's all you're doing. You're storing energy. It's like a plant charging its batteries. I mean, that's all it's really doing. Just a battery. Instead of calling it a battery, we call it sugar. But that's something, that simple thing is something that you're not likely to forget. But sometimes when you go into the book and try to memorize these long definitions, it's, I don't know, you lose track of like the simple thing. All right, let me go back to the PowerPoint.
Right here.
PowerPoint, okay. All right, so here we are. You got the green disk that's happening in, that's where the light reactions happen. And then you got like this fluid called stroma. They're not really pointing to it that well, but it's this fluid, and that's where the dark reactions are happening. And that's like another look, right? So another, and I'm gonna skip right through this, but so we're taking light, sunlight. Here's the sun up here. The sunlight's shining down on this plant. Here's the thylakoid. It's doing the light reactions. I'll get to this in a minute. But you see the light reactions, what's coming out of it? ATP and NADPH, which to you, since we never talked about, we never really talked about oxidation and reduction reactions, NAD, whatever form it's in, means electrons. They're electron carriers. right? Because you see it in two different forms. Look, NAD+, NADPH, whatever. It starts with NAD. It's an electron carrier, so that means electrons, right? So we're getting ATP and electrons out of light reactions. We're going to use that to make sugar. Okay, so I'm gonna go into it a little bit. Okay, let me skip over that. Okay, let's talk about light. So these are photons that come down. If you look up at the top, the photons, they come down. All the sunlight comes down. It's not just sun. See, we shouldn't call it sunlight because that means it's like, well, I mean, I don't know, I guess we can call it light, but I mean, it all comes down in different wavelengths. Right? Some of these wavelengths we can see, and some of these wavelengths, most of the wavelengths we cannot see. So if you look up here, you know, you have like radio waves, and they're telling, you know, some of these radio waves can be like the size of buildings. And then you get down, you know, whatever, microwaves, UV, all that stuff, right? So within all of these different wavelengths, a small section of them is light, visible light that we can see. So we're seeing, when we see something, when we see a tree and we look at the leaves and we notice that the leaves are green, that's because that particular wavelength is getting reflected. It's getting bounced off the object. So the leaves are not accepting that particular wavelength. So if you look at all this visible light, if we're talking about like the leaf in a tree, this stuff out here is getting absorbed. So we're not even seeing it. It's going inside the leaf. This here is getting reflected. It's bouncing off the leaf. That's why you can see green. It's just that you're not seeing the other colors because it's getting absorbed. So an object that has a color, you're seeing what's being reflected, not what's being absorbed. Some of those wavelengths are being absorbed. Sometimes it gets absorbed by the object, and then it just comes out as heat. But in any way, the color you see is the color being the color being reflected. It's that simple. All right, so I'm going to go back to the board for a second. And I want to talk about what happens when photons hit these atoms.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, okay, so within a leaf, within the thylakoid, inside the thylakoid, you have different pigments. And you've heard of chlorophyll. That's the most popular pigment. There's other pigments inside plants. Not all plants use just chlorophyll. Most plants do. And chlorophyll's green, right? So we're seeing green reflected, and what's getting absorbed, like reds, yellows, oranges. Plants like to absorb those colors, and they like to reflect green. But that's just chlorophyll. That's just the pigment chlorophyll. But another pigment that's inside plants would be carotenoids, which I don't know how to spell exactly. I'm guessing here. But you can see carrot, right? So you can already guess what is getting reflected. Carotenoids are going to reflect orange, yellow, red, like that type of color. So it's kind of the opposite. Chlorophyll's reflecting green. Carotenoids are going to reflect like reds and orange, some yellow, right? And then there's even other pigments called phycocyanins, for example. So when you see the word phyco or phyto, you're thinking plant, and then cyan is like blue, purple. I think it's blue, but so this is reflecting. So like purple cabbage, right? Those are high in phycocyanins. The main pigment is phycocyanin in that cabbage, not chlorophyll. The main pigment in carrots or squash or something would be like carotenoids, right? This is the reason that the leaves change color. Not so much in Louisiana, but as you go north, right, in fall, the leaves change color because when you look at a lot of trees, you'll see chlorophyll and there's carotenoids, but the carotenoids are like they're hidden, they're masked. So when you look at even these trees around here, a lot of these like oak trees and stuff, the main pigment is chlorophyll, but underneath it, what you don't see are carotenoids. It's just that they're being bombarded by chlorophyll, so you don't even get a chance to see any other color other than green. So the trees, when it starts getting closer to winter, those trees are measuring the amount of day versus the amount of night. We call it like photoperiod, right? So they know when the days are getting shorter and shorter. And so those trees know that winter's coming and there's no point in making leaves. So it's just going to be cold. There's not going to be a lot of sun. Weather's going to suck, polar vortex, all of that. So a lot of trees are like, I'm just not going to bother with the leaves. I'll just shut off the making leaves and I'll start again like in April. So they start shutting down everything. The first thing that a tree will do is shut off its chlorophyll production. So when it shuts off the chlorophyll, now you can see the carotenoids. So for a couple of weeks, you can see, yellows and oranges and reds because you're not seeing the chlorophyll, you're seeing carotenoids. These aren't really in trees. So that's what you're seeing. And then after a couple of weeks, it's also going to shut this down, right? And then the leaves turn brown and then they fall off. That's it. The plant doesn't want to, it's not a good investment return for the plants. What it's getting out of it, as far as making sugar, it's not a good payoff. So anyway, let me go back to chlorophyll. So we've got this, within the thylakoid, those green discs, it's filled with chlorophyll. So it's a pigment. That chlorophyll, that's where the sun is hitting directly. Right? So the sun, what's the sunlight? The photons, what are they hitting? The leaf. What about the leaf? The chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast, they're hitting the thylakoid. In the thylakoid, they're hitting the chlorophyll. So now we're talking about the atoms in chlorophyll. So this might get you lightheaded, but remember how atoms work. Here's an atom of hydrogen. There's a proton and there's an electron. That's all hydrogens are, right? Protons and electrons. So the electron is orbiting around the atom. Here's the sun up here. And here's all the photons coming down and hitting the chlorophyll, right? So usually what happens in something like, let's go back to your car, like the hood of your car. It's got paint in it and stuff like that. So this electron is sitting in your car and the sunlight hits it. This electron is going around it like that. And so when the photons hit it, the electrons get excited. They like start wobbling and they can't, they don't want it. And so they go around, sunlight hits it, they go like this, and then they jump out of their orbit, and then they immediately come right back. It's just like, you know, a part of a second. So electrons going around, when the sun hits it, just pops out and goes right back again. It jumps out of its orbit. It's like unstable, right? It's just like, it's going around, everything's fine, sunlight hits it, it starts going like this, can't stay in its lane, and then it just keeps popping out of its orbit. But it returns right back again. And when that happens, heat is given off. So the electron goes right back, and instead, so what happened to that energy, right? The energy from the sun made the electron jump out, but it didn't go anywhere. So instead, what happens is that that energy is heat, that created some heat, and the heat goes out like that. So when you're like driving down a long road and you see it's all wavy, or if you look at like a really hot day and you see your car and it's like a little thing of waviness, that's what's happening. The electrons are jumping out of their orbit, they're going back, and you're seeing the heat come up off of that. That's normally what happens. Normally what happens. Plants, this is the key to their survival. They catch it, yeah, they figured out how to catch the electron. So the electron jumps out of its orbit, the plant catches it before it can return. And now you've got energy. So the electron never makes it back. And heat's never given off. So like when other things get hot because of sunlight, plants, the leaves of plants are not getting hot. They're never going to be hot to touch or anything because they're not letting that energy go.
So when that happens with the plant and the plant captures that cell that it was revolving around just dies?
Yeah,
Because
so.
it doesn't have an electron to survive pretty much.
Yeah, good. So yeah, that's a question. So what happens, you know, this electron is going to jump out of its orbit. Here it is up here. It's caught. The plant catches it. But now, how are we going to, you know, you can't keep doing that forever, right? Because eventually you're going to run out, the plant's going to run out of electrons. Because, you know, the leaf's going to run out of electrons. You can only get so many electrons because you're not returning it. So how do we get more electrons? So to get more electrons, we split water. So the plant has lots of electrons around it in the form of water. As long as a plant has water somewhere, it can pull water up from the roots, and it can take that water, and so you think about what is water. It's H2O. So it's hydrogen, hydrogen, and an oxygen. So we'll take the two hydrogens, get the electrons from that, and put them back here. This oxygen puts it in, we'll just get rid of it. The oxygen is going to go back into the air so that you and I can breathe it in. And the plant is taking the electrons off of the hydrogens. So that's one of the reasons why plants need water. That's one of the things that they do with it. That's their energy. Like they're using the sunlight to get electrons, but ultimately they're taking it off of water, right? So the electrons from the water are going back to the chlorophyll and replacing the electrons missing from chlorophyll. I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. Does anyone have any questions? That's what this is showing here. What this slide is trying to show you is here's the sun, the photons come down from the sun, they go into the chlorophyll molecule. And where do we find this chlorophyll molecule? Like what part of the chloroplast do you find it in? Thylakoid. So chlorophyll is found in the thylakoid, right? And then right here, see how it's showing you like it's E minus, they're saying the electrons, right? So the electrons are getting excited, they're jumping out of their orbit, the plant catches it. And now you've got a source of energy. Now you've got electrons. But don't worry about all this. I'm going to come back to this, but I'm going to go here first. Well, I'm going to go here first. All right. So the secret of the plant's success is that it's able to catch the electrons before they return to the atom. That's how plants, or we could say autotrophs, that's how autotrophs are different than us. They can catch those electrons. We cannot. We have to break down food. Fungus has to absorb the nutrients. Whatever the animal life is, whatever the thing is, it's not a plant, it has to somehow get, we call it like organic molecules, right? It has to be able to somehow get food. Just put it that way, right? Plants, autotrophs, things that go through photosynthesis, they catch the electron. So now when we look at, now that we've gone through that, let's look at the light reactions. Right, so the light reactions happen in the thylakoid. There's two systems inside of it, two photosystems. And you can just imagine our photosystem as like a group of chlorophyll. So we have photosystem. If you look at this here, you see Photosystem II and Photosystem I. I don't know why I know why they named it reverse, because they discovered Photosystem I first, then they discovered Photosystem II, and they realized that Photosystem II was actually before Photosystem I, and they didn't bother to change the names, because they don't care about you. So it's not that this happens first, or this is the order that they discovered it, so that's all it means. So it really doesn't mean anything. Another name for this, Photosystem II and Photosystem I, is P680 and P700. Because if we go back to this right here, P680 chlorophyll loves this, it'll take in all of this, but its favorite wavelength of light is like 680. This stands for nanometers, and you don't have to worry about that. But you imagine all this light coming down like in wavelengths, like up and down. And then P700 loves that particular wavelength the most. So that's another thing you can call it. P680 is Photosystem II, P700 Photosystem I. So let's go back to this. So within the light reactions, you have two photosystems. You have Photosystem II and Photosystem I. And they do slightly different things. So let's look at what's going on in this one. Here's the guy, there's the photons coming down from the sun. It knocks the electron out of its orbit. And usually what happens is that electron returns, except for plants. So you see, it's getting caught. It's not returning back down, it's getting caught. And look what she's going to do with it. She's going to roll it down that milk. Electron transport chain. That's the electron transport chain. It's the same idea as in cellular respiration. So it's the same electron transport chain. you're creating like this proton gradient, you're pumping H pluses onto one side, and then they flow through the other side. That's what, and then that's making ATP. So that's what she's doing. She's taking the electrons, and she's turning on the pumps, and she's making ATP with it. And then the electrons roll down into Photosystem I. The sunlight hits Photosystem I, same thing, bounces it up. And this guy catches it. I call him Hairy Back. That's why he doesn't wear a tank top. Hairy Back catches it, and he's going to drop it into that bucket. He's not going to make ATP with it. He's just going to hold on to it. So if you look at the difference between Photosystem II and Photosystem I, Photosystem II is making ATP. That's its purpose. Photosystem I is storing electrons. So we've got two different sources of energy. Battery versus gas. Both makes the car go. Right? So we're different. We don't keep our electrons. We use it all to make ATP, and that's what we like, as like humans, right? Plants, no, they keep a little bit of it aside. They keep the electrons. So we've got, at the end of the light reactions, we've got two sources of energy, ATP and electrons. Remember, I keep telling you NAD, it's called here NADPH, but whatever. If it starts with NAD, it's an electron carrier. That's the bucket in this analogy, right? It's carrying the electrons. So if you if you look at like other videos or read other things, you'll keep seeing references to NADPH or NADP positive. Whatever it is, that's what they're doing. They're carrying electrons around. So this ATP and these electrons, the plant is going to take these and bring them over to the stroma, bring them over to the dark reactions.
Which one?
They're going to bring both.
Both of them?
Yeah, we're going to use the ATP and the electrons. We're going to use them both to make sugar. These are both for the plant. As far as the plant's concerned, electrons and ATP are both usable energy. This is like dollars, American dollars. Sunlight is energy, but that's like Canadian dollars. Fine, it's energy, but it can't be used. How do we turn the Canadian dollars, how do we convert it into American dollars so that we can go down to Dollar General? I don't know why I said Dollar General. Because that's where I like to shop. So we can take it to Whole Foods, to sound bougie. So there we go, that's the light reactions. And then here's like the same photo, just a little bit, just more confusing, right? But here's Photosystem II. The sunlight hits all these chlorophyll molecules, bounces the electrons out of the molecules. The electrons are caught, and then they're sent down the electron transport chain. That's what this is here. That's this right here. So they're sent down so you see another word here, Cytochrome Complex, if you ever see it. I mean, we're not going to go into the particulars of the Cytochrome Complex, because I don't think there's no point for you for your life, right? You're not going to need to know it. But you should have an idea of what's going on. It's essentially the electron transport chain. We're making ATP, right? All this yellow is saying we're making ATP from it. Then those electrons are going to roll into Photosystem I. they get bounced out again. Forget about this electron transport chain. They get bounced out again, and you see here in yellow NADPH. And look at this other side, by the way. So they're saying here, look at number 2, splitting of water releases oxygen. That's not why the plant splits water. It doesn't care about oxygen. It wants the electrons. We got to put the electrons back in here. Because these electrons keep getting bounced out of here. We got to replace them. So that's what you're seeing here. Take water, break it all up, take the electrons off of the hydrogen, put them back in here, and then the oxygen, you just get rid of it. The electrons that get bounced out of here, they're going to come back. Let me look at this one. The electrons that get bounced out of here came from here anyway, so photosystem 1 is not losing anything. Photosystem 1 is bouncing out electrons, but it keeps getting more from photosystem 2 anyway, so it doesn't matter. It's photosystem 2 that's losing the electrons.
So is photon only in the photosystem 1?
No, photons are in photosystem 1 and photosystem 2.
Oh, I see it now.
It's a sledgehammer, yeah.
Yeah, I see it.
The sunlight's hitting both of them, and in both cases, the electrons are getting bounced out of their orbits. Just photosystem 1, they can replace it. They just get more from photosystem 2. It just keeps rolling down this ramp, and they've got a good supply. Photosystem 1, once this electron gets bounced out, there's nothing to replace it. So that's why photosystem 2 gets it from water. Any questions? We don't have much more to go. So I want you to know something that I would likely ask you is, what's the difference between photosystem 2 or photosystem 1? Or I might word that differently. I may say, what's the difference between photosystem or P680 and P700? So maybe I won't say, what's the difference between photosystem 2 and photosystem 1? I'll say, what's the difference between P680 and P700? So I'm just saying that, but that's what I'm asking you.
One makes ATP and one makes
Right.
NADP.
One, yeah, and you could say that. So one makes photosystem 2 makes ATP. Photosystem 2, if it's easier for you to say it makes NADPH, that's fine. Or if you want to say it holds electrons, that also is the answer.
Photosystem 2 is P680.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to have it in my head to remember.
Yeah.
And P700, you said holds
Yeah.
electrons?
Holds the electrons. You know, I'm really like I'm generalizing and I'm simplifying all of this, and I'm not giving you like the whole story. But in my opinion, it's like way more important that you kind of get an understanding of what's going on and how energy's moving around. I just think it's, you know, I don't know. It's bullshit to know all these details. And your book is going to get into the particulars of these proteins and all that. And I never see them asking this on like the HESI or the TEAS, or having to know this for like nursing, or having to know this for anything, unless you're going to go to grad school in biology and you're going to study botany. It's not really going to matter in your life. But will you be asked general questions about photosynthesis on like these tests or something? Yeah, I mean, it's that might come up. So I want you to get kind of how this how photosynthesis works, but knowing all the particulars. Same thing with like that's why I didn't make you learn citrate and isocitrate and oxaloacetate, because you're just not going to need it in your life. It's just hamburger helper, and I'm trying to give you meat. So anyway, this is just showing you that it's the same process. It's the same. What's happening here in the thylakoid space is the same thing that happens in, or in the thylakoid is the same thing that happens in the mitochondria. I'm not really going to ask you about proton gradients and stuff again, because that's over. But it's the same idea, right? You're turning these pumps on. You're pushing all the H pluses to one side. They're all getting pushed inside here. Then it comes through here, and that's making ATP. It's the same thing as cellular respiration, same idea. But now here's the thing. What are we going to do with the ATP and the electrons? Now we take the ATP, and we take the electrons, and we bring them over to the dark reactions. And I'm not going to make you know all of this. But this looks kind of like Krebs cycle. Same idea, right? This thing's going around, except the Krebs cycle was all about breaking up the acetyl-CoA. I kept saying, oh, strip off the electrons, harvest the electrons, break acetyl-CoA into nothing, right? So it was all about breaking up something. This Calvin cycle, or another way to say is this dark reaction, this Calvin cycle, a dark reaction, this is about building something. So this one's not breaking anything up, it's building. And so what we can do here is we can follow these little circles. Right, so remember when we talk about how big molecules are or how small they are, we always measure it in carbons. So like I told you, glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. Pyruvate, for example, is a 3-carbon molecule. So we just measure it in terms of carbons, and that's what this is doing here. These dots represent how big a molecule is. So if you look what's going into it, it's like every time you put 3, so this thing's constantly going around. Every time you put 3 of these in, look at, the output is half of a sugar. In fact, that molecule you might have remembered, G3P. So you end up with 1-glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is half of a sugar, right? If we were to put 6 carbon dioxides into this, we end up with 1 glucose. So this thing's going around, and the only molecules that I want you to know, because I've seen them on exams, like placement tests and stuff like that, RUBP. I've seen RUBP. We don't call it ribulose biphosphate, we just call it right here in parentheses. Everyone calls it that. And Rubisco at the top. Rubisco is an enzyme. I've seen that on placement exams. And you're like, well, that's not nursing. What does that have to do? I know, I'm with you, but there it is. They, I forget what the exact question was, but it's like Rubisco is the most. It's out of all the enzymes that exist in our world, Rubisco is like the greatest quantity. Like if we were to take all the enzymes and which enzyme, I don't know, how am I wording this? I don't know how to speak. Which enzyme do you find the most of in the world? The answer is Rubisco. Rubisco adds carbon dioxide to the RUBP. I don't know how to say it. I hope you understand what I'm trying to
Most
say.
found enzyme.
What's that?
Most found enzyme.
Most found enzyme. That would be a lot easier.
And you said RUBP is, what is it? It's what adds,
RUBP is going to be added, like, so we're gonna add one carbon dioxide to one RUBP. That's called carbon fixation. The rest of it, I'm not gonna go over with you because it's complicated. I would watch maybe a video on it if you really want to understand what's going on. But the easiest way to know, to like understand this is just every time this goes around 6 times, you end up with a molecule of glucose. Or here what they're saying is that every time it goes around 3 times, you end up with G3P, which is half of a glucose. I mean, that's fine either way. And that's it, so what we're doing here is we're taking carbon dioxide, and they're not showing you water, but we're taking carbon dioxide and water, and we're putting it all together to make sugar. So you see the input at the top, at the 12 o'clock position is carbon dioxide. The output at the 6 o'clock position, sugar. That output right here, this is the basis of everything you eat. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. Like you're like, well, how do you get a steak? Well, it's a cow's muscle. Well, how did the cow get the muscle? Right? It eats grass. It all goes back to plants, and it all goes back to this. How are we getting electricity to power your computer? Well, they're taking diesel or oil at the energy plant and they're running the turbines. Where did they get the oil? The dead dinosaurs. The dead dinosaurs ate plants. Or other dinosaurs, but somebody ate plants, right? And the plants were taking energy from the sunlight. So it all started with this simple molecule here. And it all started with taking carbon dioxide out of the air. So when you get into the dashboard, when you look at the dashboard of your car, next time you're in it, that's this right here. All that plastic crap that's in your car and in your lives, it all came from this. All those petroleum products which make plastics came from the Calvin cycle. So now if you look up here, in order to make, when we want to take carbon dioxide and make sugar, that's an anabolic reaction, right? And so you need energy. And you can see, we're almost done here, 5 more minutes. We can see the energy sources here. Here's ATP, here's ATP, here's NADPH, aka electrons. So if you look up here, it looks like we're using twice as much ATP than electrons. So if you keep doing that, what's going to happen? You're going to run out of ATP, and you're going to have some electrons still around. So now the plant, every once in a while, this plant is going to run into a problem. This plant is going to use up all of its ATP before it uses up the electrons. So it's going to be like an imbalance. So the plant is going to need to go back and get some more ATP, just ATP. So let's go back to our, right here. So you notice here, we're getting ATP and we're getting electrons, but sometimes we just need ATP. So what's going to happen is that this guy here, hairyback, he's not going to put the electron in the bucket. He's going to throw it back down on the ramp. And then it's going to roll down, make more ATP. This guy's going to knock the electron back up to him. He's going to take the electron and throw it back down on the ramp again. It's like going in a cycle, right? Like a circle here. So we call this cyclic, meaning going in a cycle, cyclic electron flow. And photosystem 1 is doing it. See, photosystem 2 is not even involved. She's just sitting there. She's just standing there right now. He keeps throwing it back down, and it keeps going like that. Because he's just trying to make some extra ATP. Because we're using more ATP than we're using electrons. So we call this cyclic electron flow. And why would you use cyclic electron flow? Because you just need to make only ATP. I might ask you about that.
What was the reason again?
Because you want to just make ATP because in this Calvin cycle, you're using more ATP than electrons. So you got to fix the balance.
So you want to make more ATP?
Yeah. You want to make more ATP, but you don't need more electrons. Does anyone have any questions? I think I've said my questions in the lecture. Maybe I'll ask you something about color, the color that you see being the color that's reflected. But I've covered my questions for the quiz. I've covered it in, it's only going to be like 4 or 5 questions maximum, and I've covered it like during this lecture. So, yeah, if you guys don't have any questions, let me. So, I'll send out an announcement, but test is Wednesday. Yeah, and I want to see all your beautiful faces. Don't
Is
feel
it
like,
this Wednesday?
huh?
Is it this Wednesday or next Wednesday?
It's Wednesday.
Okay.
Just the quiz.
Quiz.
Because I know that this, like, well, let me stop presenting. Dude, this online stuff, it's difficult because it's asking you guys to be. It's just I think it's asking too much of you guys in some ways. I mean, if it were me, I would turn my camera off, and to be honest, I would mute, turn my camera off. I'd go do something else, and then I tell myself I'll watch it later. And I wouldn't, and I wouldn't study, and then I'd get up to the test, and then I would try to figure out, all right, how am I going to get my way through the test? But there's a camera on me watching me. Okay, how am I going to look up stuff with the camera watching me? And so it's just messed up. Like, and I watch, my older kid's he's almost done with college. I've been watching him for 3 years. He does the same shit. He's all online, and he's not watching it. Like I can hear it at his bedroom. I hear the lecture, and then I'm like, oh, good, he's lecturing, right? And then if I like go into his room to like ask him something, he's sleeping. He's got the computer going right next to him. He's dead asleep because he's been up all night playing whatever game he's playing. And then that's it. And he's like, oh, well, it's just, they're not talking about anything anyway. I'm like, all right, but. And then he asked me, well, anyway, whatever. But look, we've got less than a month of class. I don't want to give anybody a D or an F, most of you need Bs. I want people passing, but at the same time, I'm not just gonna pass you for nothing. Right? I'm not under any quota, right? I don't have to pass anybody. I can give all Fs. I'll get away with it. I won't get in trouble. Don't worry about me. But I don't want to give away. It's depressing. You guys are already depressed with your school situation, right? So I don't want to give you a bad grade. That would suck. So I want to make sure that you're like participating. And maybe if I make you take the test in class, it's more likely that you're gonna prepare. So